Hello everyone. So alongside the rest of planet Earth, I have recently read, enjoyed, fallen in love with Sally Rooney's Normal People. It's heartbreaking, it's captivating, it's beautiful. And the central protagonist is a guy called Connell, who is an English literature student at Trinity College in Dublin. Now, you may or may not know that I too am an English student. I just finished my English degree and I'm about to graduate, and so this video isn't me just trying to prove that I am like Connell from Normal People. That is not true. Okay, maybe that is a little bit true. Aside from that, the other main point is that this glorious book and the TV adaptation mention and allude to a lot of classical literature. And the thing that I really noticed while I was reading it is that from the books that I know and I have studied myself, there is so much symbolism and significance to the books that are alluded to. During this pandemic, I've been looking for ways to support independent local bookshops that aren't having people come to their stores at the moment. And so I did a little bit of a shop. And by a little bit, I mean I did quite a big shop. These are all of the books in Normal People that Connell studies. Let's just say there's a fair few, and my plan for this week is to read all of them and talk about how they add value to the book. And I know what you're thinking, I know what you're gonna say. Surely you've got better things to be doing than that. Well, no, actually. This is a pandemic. Also, I have nothing else to do anyway. So yes, that is how I'm going to be spending my week. It feels doable. The only slight issue might be this book, because this book is notoriously very, very dense, but then again, so am I. So I have definitely got my work cut out for me, but you know what? Challenge accepted. So that is what this video is going to be. Welcome to my channel, welcome to this video, and let's get going.
On tonight's program, ladies and gentlemen, we have something that's gonna make you sick.
So because the book and the TV show reference different pieces of literature, I've tried to sort of create some sort of chronology so that I read them in the same order that they're mentioned by sort of merging the plots of the two. Does that make sense? I don't know if it even made sense to me, to be honest. So I'll leave the timestamps to each piece of literature in the crotch box down below, but first and foremost, I think the first piece of literature that is referenced in the TV show is In the Waiting Room by Elizabeth Bishop. This is a poem that they study in the classroom. I remember reading it a couple of years ago, but I just reread it just to refresh my memory. And it's this really tightly written poem all about being apprehensive about growing up and coming of age and seeing adults around you and knowing that you will one day grow up to be like them. Now I'm gonna go full on English student and just dive right in even though no one asked me to. But in the poem there's reference to women's breasts, especially older women's breasts, and the child who is reading this magazine and is kind of confronted by this symbol of adulthood and adult sexuality is horrified at first. And so I guess the symbolism there in relation to that idea of coming of age is sexual awakening and losing virginities, and that is something that happens in Normal People. Normal People has this very honest discussion about sex, and that is such a strong point of this book. And this poem by Elizabeth Bishop, In the Waiting Room, is being taught in the classroom that Marianne and Connell are in at their school. So it sort of foreshadows and preempts their own anxieties about growing up and the future. And then obviously throughout the book and the TV adaptation, we watch them grow up. So I think that is probably why In the Waiting Room was chosen as the poem to be being taught in that very first class that they are in. And yeah, we love a bit of foreshadowing. The first piece of literature mentioned in Sally Rooney's book of Normal People is The Communist Manifesto by Marx and Engels. Connell recommends to Marianne that she read The Communist Manifesto, and it's definitely a book which influences the way that both of the protagonists think and also how Sally Rooney as an author writes. They go on to have these conversations about how human beings are reified and commodified and used as workers, and class disparity is a huge conversation in Normal People, and that is exposed most obviously and overtly at university. Sally Rooney herself considers herself a Marxist writer. I'll leave a link to a really interesting interview that she did down below if you want to find out more. But she talks about how the novel as a form is sort of a way of buying into a world of people who read novels. So this world of people who are well read is kind of perpetuated and upheld by buying books. I guess it's what Mill would call a higher pleasure. So fundamentally, as a writer of that book, Sally Rooney is very aware of the Communist Manifesto. And yeah, I think the reference to this book really clearly introduces the themes of Marxism and how you can read this as a Marxist text. This is the next book which is mentioned, which I'm going to be reading, and this is Doris Lessing's The Golden Notebook. The way that this book is mentioned is that Connell is kind of admiring it on Marianne's bookshelf. Marianne suggests he read it, and he tells her that he already has. I've just started reading it, but I will get back to you when I've finished it, which, spoiler alert, that's going to take me a little while. So probably see you tomorrow or in a couple of days. Okay, so some time has passed. Let's talk about The Golden Notebook. Like I said earlier, this is an incredibly dense piece of feminist literature. I think the reason it's mentioned is to prove that Connell is very open-minded and thinking about the world that he exists in and engaging in really kind of complex and rich and critical literature. And it's obviously mentioned how intelligent Marianne and Connell both are, and so I think this kind of just shows the fact that they've both read this is testament to that interest in the world and that willingness to critique it. So the character Anna in this novel keeps 4 notebooks, and each one is a different colour, and they represent like the different kind of things that she grapples with in her life. One of those notebooks is her discussion with communism, which again links back to the Marxist ideas that Rooney talks about. And interestingly, one of the notebooks is a work of fiction. It's a novel that she's writing, and Connell also writes his pieces of fiction in a notebook, and I literally went back and watched scene by scene to check whether it was a yellow notebook like the one in this book, but it's a black one. I was rooting for you, normal people. We were all rooting for you. That would have been crazy symbolism, but quite niche. So I'm not blaming them for not including it, but like that would have been pretty cool. At least he read this at the age of, well, before 18, which is pretty impressive. Also, I should mention, I wasn't really looking forward to this just because of the sheer length of it. Like, I'm not really a massive fan of really long books because my attention span is the length of a TikTok, but I really enjoyed this book, and Doris Lessing actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So there you go. If you want to read it, I would recommend. The next book that is mentioned in Normal People is Emma by Jane Austen. Now, this was one of the very first books that I read as part of my English degree, and it's also one of the first books that Connell reads for his English degree. We are just so similar. And I recently read a few interviews where Sally Rooney talks about Jane Austen as the first kind of British novelist and the only real author from that time that we still read frequently today. Now, the interesting thing about Emma is that Emma is one of the first novels which uses free indirect discourse. Now, what free indirect discourse basically means is that throughout the novel you can see from multiple characters' perspectives, and sometimes you even jump from one character's perspective to another one's in the same sentence. And Normal People is definitely influenced by that form. You kind of get to see Marianne's perspective at the same time as Connell's, and that's why the misunderstandings that they have are so kind of torturous to read. And also later, when Connell is in a seminar, he talks about that psychological shift that had never been done before through the form of free indirect discourse in the novel Emma, which Sally Rooney uses. Honestly, I was loving every minute of that. This might be a little bit of a tenuous link, but I recently read Sense and Sensibility, and in Sense and Sensibility, the characters are called Marianne and Colonel Bradshaw, and they're the characters that end up together. Now, Marianne and Connell, I don't know, I'm just putting it out there. Potentially, that is where their names come from. I am so happy to be proven wrong, but that's just a little conspiracy theory that they may actually come from characters by Jane Austen. The other book mentioned in the English seminars that we see in the TV series is Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe. This was actually the first ever book that I read for my degree, and when I read it I was like, oh my god, I have chosen the wrong degree. Defoe is often credited as the father of the modern novel, and Moll Flanders, as well as his other books Roxana and A Journal of the Plague Year, really emphasize facts and figures and exact details, very, very precise details, and that is because the novel was sort of being distinguished as a form as opposed to poetry, which was very symbolic. So the point of the early novel was to represent real life, and so there's so many meticulous details. Moll Flanders as a character is also constantly aware of how much money she has, what class she is, and the reference and allusion to this book is used when Connell is in his first English seminar, and he's surrounded by these students who are sort of showing off their knowledge and their higher reading without actually really saying anything of value. And I think that links Connell to those ideas that Sally Rooney has about the novel as a form, that I spoke about a couple of days ago. So I can't actually believe that I managed to get through a whole ass English degree avoiding Arthurian legend, and then for this video I ended up reading Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory. These are the stories of the Knights of the Round Table, Lancelot, Guinevere, Merlin, and it's referenced in Normal People when Connell gives a presentation on this, and then his classmates consider him to be a genius, which, to be totally fair, if you can give a coherent presentation on this book, then you are a genius, my friend. It discusses intense love and kind of star-crossed lovers. And when Connell gives a presentation on this book, he is really anxious and nervous. He can't stop looking away from his script in the fear that the people in the classroom will think that he's stupid, I guess. That is representative of this fear of not understanding what is deemed to be like high literature, because this isn't commonly widely read stuff. Connell pulls through, he's heralded as a literature genius, and it's happy days, to be totally honest with you. This idea continues with allusions to James Joyce. Now, no particular book is mentioned, but one of Connell's course mates basically says to him that she heard he did an amazing essay on James Joyce and she wanted to read it, basically. James Joyce, again, is one of those authors who is very difficult to comprehend. When I studied Ulysses for my English degree, I was traumatized. In order to properly understand the text by James Joyce, you have to have done so much prior reading just to understand all of the references that he makes. There are so many literary references and like intellectual snobbery, I guess. For example, in Ulysses, there is a chapter where James Joyce replicates and emulates the writing style of various authors, and that chapter starts by replicating the work of Sir Thomas Malory. Coincidence? I think not. And then throughout the chapter, the writing style like slowly develops and goes through different authors and ends with Charles Dickens, I'm pretty sure. And so the fact that Connell is able to A, comprehend that, and B, analyze it critically and think about it critically and present a nuanced idea about that is impressive, and that is all I have to say on that. The next book that I read because a fictional character read them is Candide or Optimism by Voltaire. Now, this book is one of the books that we see Connell reading when he's just like laying in his bed reading it, but I guess that suggests that he studies it, so that's why I've read it. This book is what's called a Bildungsroman, and a Bildungsroman is a kind of coming-of-age story about a person's moral and psychological development and growth. But Normal People itself is kind of a Bildungsroman anyway. The story is basically about these lovers, Candide and Cunegonde, who are constantly being separated and coming back together. Does that sound familiar? That's pretty much what happens with Connell and Marianne, and this is also quite a raunchy book. At the time it was published, it was quite controversial. Normal People is also quite raunchy, and yes, another book down. Okay, updates. I just finished reading the next book, which is The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. This, funnily enough, is another Bildungsroman, and we see Connell reading this book when he's in bed and Marianne texts him asking if they can become friends again, I think. So a pretty crucial moment in their own sort of development as adults, and this book really deals with that relationship between children and adult life and the adult world and responsibilities. So I would suggest this is used symbolically on the screen to sort of show another development in their own Bildungsroman. Hello, it's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new book for me. This morning I read All My Sons, which is a play by Arthur Miller. I really enjoyed this. Connell is seen reading this in the TV series when he is on his way to Italy to reunite with Marianne after they have this big fallout and misunderstanding. All My Sons is a play about how an event is interpreted in different ways by different people, and they all kind of end up arguing and bickering about it. It causes a lot of upset, it causes a lot of hurt, kind of like the misunderstanding between Marianne and Connell. We've cracked the code, kids. We have cracked the code. He's reading this on the train before they reunite. As we know as viewers, this situation that they're in, the fact that they had to break up, wasn't his plan. And I think this play definitely discusses how tension arises from people's different interpretations of events. Bam. Wow, I can't believe I caught that. The next novel mentioned in the book is kind of ambiguous, kind of vague. It basically references that Connell is carrying with him a beaten up James Salter novel. Now, it doesn't actually specify which one. So when I was doing my book order, I just ordered the cheapest one, and that was A Sport and a Pastime. This is about a couple. It's very much about eroticism and the body and the soul and dreams. But the female character is called Anne-Marie, which is kind of the reverse of Marianne. So maybe that's a link. I mean, you should have warmed up for that one because that is a stretch, especially because I'm not 100% sure whether this was the right one. I don't know if I'm trying to convince you or myself that reading this book was not a waste of time and that it was useful for the purposes of this video, but since we don't actually know which James Salter novel he was reading, I mean, on to the next book, I think. Okay, we are absolutely rattling through these today, but the next thing I read was the selected poems of Frank O'Hara. When Connell goes to Italy to see Marianne, he buys her a collection of Frank O'Hara's poetry to give to her as a birthday gift. And Frank O'Hara has this poem called Having a Coke with You. Please go and read that poem. It is beautiful. It's such a great poem. I'm so glad that doing this video made me discover that poem. And after this moment where Connell gifts Frank O'Hara's poetry, there are so many references and allusions to this poem, Having a Coke with You. The poem is basically about being totally infatuated with someone, just wanting to do all of these amazing things, all of the things that you love with that person, being pleased that they haven't been to a gallery yet because it means you get to go and experience it with them for the first time. When they're in Italy, Marianne and Connell are having a conversation and he talks about how nice it is to share an ice cream with you or sit in Italian piazzas with you or something along those lines. Obviously that is a sign of affection, which totally links back to this poem. And then at a later point in the novel, they are sitting in Connell's bedroom and they share a Coke. They share a Coke. Listen, some of the links that I've forged in this video have been tenuous, but that I am so chuffed with. So Sally Rooney, I applaud you. That was incredible. Frank O'Hara's poetry is also really closely linked to New York City as a setting, which is where Connell moves to at the end of the novel. Oh my god, Sally Rooney really outdid herself with this one. Hello, you joined me on the final day of this challenge, I guess? Now, I'm pretty sure this is the only other book that Connell studies in Normal People. Correct me if I'm wrong. Actually, do you know what? Don't correct me if I'm wrong, because I did not do all of this for nothing. The final piece of literature that I'm going to speak about is The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. When I first started filming this video, I had no idea how pertinent and appropriate this book would become in relation to what's going on in the world right now. Connell's final recommendation to Marianne is to read The Fire Next Time. Now, this is an essay all about racial injustice in America, specifically relating to James Baldwin growing up in Harlem. It's an impassioned plea to end the racial nightmare in America. And how appropriate is that to what is going on in the world right now? I think the reason that it's mentioned in Normal People is because Normal People is very aware of social injustice. It definitely features a lot of social criticism, as we've spoken about in this video, but I'm going to second Connell's recommendation and tell you, please read this book. It is so important that we all take this time to educate ourselves on the Black Lives Matter movement today, and the fact that this was first published in 1963 and is still so appropriate says a lot. It speaks volumes. So yeah, I'm gonna thank Connell, a fictional character, for recommending this. I guess I should thank Sally Rooney for introducing this to my life because it's so powerful. And I will leave some introductory resources to the Black Lives Matter movement down below in the description box. So I think that means we're done. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for sticking around for the whole thing. This introduced me to so much more fascinating literature, and so I hope you enjoyed hearing my analysis of it, and maybe it gave you some things to add to your reading list. There are a few more books that I mentioned in Normal People that Connell doesn't actually study, but Marianne reads or other characters mentioned. So if you would like a part 2, yeah, I'm gonna say this. If you would like a part 2, then like this video, let me know in the comments below, and I will do a part 2 where I read the books that Marianne reads in Normal People. Oh my god, is this a good idea? I don't even know. In the meantime, I will continue to try and be Connell from Normal People, or Paul Maskell. I'm happy with either, to be honest. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more from me, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
In case I don't see ya, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.